Hi, I'm Shira Carpel.
And I'm Shayna Gaunt, and we're board-certified behavior analysts. At How to ABA, we provide practical resources, community, and support to ABA professionals. In each episode of our podcast, we will be having real conversations with real people, sharing real stories about ABA.
We'll share relevant strategies and actionable tips that will make us all better ABA practitioners. It's the ABA content you need that you're not going to learn in a textbook. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Today, we are talking to Sonya MacCrimmon, who actually does something super interesting, kind of in the field of ABA, but took a little bit of, a turn out of the field in order to apply it to a new direction. So we're really excited to hear more about it. Welcome, Sonya.
Hi, Sonya.
Hi,
welcome.
thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So tell us a little bit about how you got into the field, a little bit about your background in ABA, and kind of how you got to where you are now.
Yeah. So at the end of my university, I was a degree in psychology, and I ended up taking a learning disabilities course, and I was very interested in it. And then there was a placement component. And so I really fell in love with it. And I ended up working at a camp in the summers called Shadow Lake. And it is really what got me into the field of ABA. I really fell in love with the experience I had at that camp. And it was like all ranges of ages, abilities, needs, everything. And so that was quite the experience. And so from there, I then took a advanced studies and special needs at Humber College. And then I got into my master's at Brock. And in that time, I started working at an agency, and I was there for about 5.5 years, implementing ABA, and I kind of worked myself up the ladder, and I was a supervisor there. And then I feel like COVID hit, and then it was very much like really looking inward on kind of personal development and personal care, and just really looking at like mindfulness and that stuff. And so I ended up getting my own life coach last year in February 2020, and that sort of moved me into this new direction of life coaching. And so I was in the field of ABA for about 5.5 years. And as of December 2020, I ended up switching and going into life coaching, self-employed entrepreneur as of January this year. And but then in that process, I also still I absolutely love ABA in all its ways. And so I do incorporate it in my life coaching, but I also now run my own business for behavior consulting. So I do still stay in the field of ABA, working with individuals with autism. And so I'm kind of doing both of those 50-50 right now.
Wow, what a cool shift. That's amazing. And you nailed it. You nailed it in terms of timing as well. So February 2020, yeah. Right before the shutdown in March, you're like, hey, let's get myself a life coach. Gosh, I wish I had a life coach in March 2020. Yeah. And then what made you decide to open up yourself to be self-employed and do life coaching yourself?
I think so. Supervision, like supervising my staff, I think was a really big part of my job that I really enjoyed, in the sense of being there to support them. And especially when there was like difficult behaviors, I was always right there, and I always wanted to support them and ask how they were doing and kind of do a debrief. And I really felt like I was drawn to that part of the job. Like I love the clinical, but I think there was also a part of supporting my staff through difficult situations as well as parents. And so when I got my own life coach, I think I kind of got a taste of like that open connection of that conversation on a more personal level in my own life. And then I kind of realized, I was like, oh, wow, like that is the part of the supervision that I really enjoy in my day-to-day job. And then I just kind of, I started to take coaching courses and whatnot, and I just really realized how much I fell in love with it. And it was also ironic timing because of the pandemic. Our agency also opened up to more like mindfulness workshops and things like that while we were doing telehealth. And so I ran a couple of them. And that was also like one of those moments where I was like, wow, I really enjoy doing this. And so that was kind of one of those things. And then I don't know why, but it was just, I decided to start my coaching part-time as of August. So like September to December, I was doing both. And that in hindsight for me, it just got to be a lot as things started to pick up with the coaching. And so ending in December, we had like a 2-week break at work. And so it kind of was like bittersweet and perfect timing at the same time. So it just kind of felt right then. And then I was like, okay, let's go all in on coaching. But then as of like February came this year, I was like, I really love ABA. I really love connecting with families. So I kind of like got myself back into it. So it was a lot of shifts in this past year for sure.
It's so interesting because we talk a lot about how like so much of our job is stuff that's not covered in the task list. You know, we talk about like there's so much more about being a good professional or being a good BCBA that's not about your technical skills. And, you know, the role that you do when you're learning ABA as an RPT or then maybe as like your supervision hours as a BCBA is very different than what it turns into. And then you start supervising and mentoring. And I find that like, as you go deeper into the field, it becomes more of, you know, you're an emotional support, you're a mentor, you're a cheerleader, you're a manager. Like it's a lot less about your technical skills and a lot more about your personality and how well you can connect with people, manage people, use your behavioral principles on employees and also on parents, because that's going to be a huge factor in your success and how well you're able to make behavior change, right? It's so much more than that. So I find it so interesting that there's so much to that, to the supervision, to the parent piece, that it's so cool to dive deeper into. And like you said, with our field kind of moving towards the ACT and the meditation and some of the stuff that's more or less behavioral and more, you know, private events and all that stuff. It's such an important part of the field. And so many people talk about like, we're so stuck to like the ABA and autism and clinical practice and how do we break out of that? And how do we, you know, discover more applications of ABA? So did you find that it was like a seamless transition, you know, using your background in ABA into this new application, or were there things that like you kind of wish you knew that were a little bit more challenging in the transition?
Yeah. So it's a great question. What's interesting is I didn't really know about ACT until I went to a workshop last May. So I think that was actually one of the big catapulting moments for me, of realizing like, oh, I don't have any like coaching background, but I have a behavioral background. And then when I saw ACT, it was like these two worlds colliding. And I was like, wow, like this is because not to say it's taboo, but it's like we always talk about the observable behaviors and we don't really talk about the private events. And that is something that I feel like I grew up in kind of with within the field is really like we can only observe what's measurable and observable. And so that was something that was kind of stuck in my head. And so when I saw ACT, I was like, wow, this is a whole new realm of really experiencing what we have to be able to apply from our background and in our field in such a different way. And it's so true is that like our emotions really do elicit behaviors. And so, yeah, they're not necessarily observable, but there's definitely components of it that we can work through to a certain extent. So I was introduced to ACT in May last year, and that actually was quite a big moment for me to realize I can totally apply this in my coaching or utilize my background in behavior analysis in a way that, so actually I use ACT with like, that is my scientific framework that I use within my coaching. So that is really kind of the foundation for me. So I do definitely merge the two. And truthfully, I would say that like a lot of my life coaching is in the field of ABA. So like a lot of the stuff that I do utilize within it. So I do have like a coaching certification, and it actually does go quite hand in hand with what we study in ABA. So it was kind of cool to go through that kind of course and have this background of being like, oh, okay, I can kind of, because it's more open-minded and more perspective taking in the sense of coaching and asking calculated questions to your clients and whatnot. So that was a really cool aspect to add. So ACT, I've taken a ton of courses in ACT and I'm certified in that. So that is definitely one of the bigger components that I have within my coaching. So that was really cool to kind of have that world, those worlds collide. So I'm a big fan of ACT.
Like that aha moment, like, oh, wow, you can actually do this. And we can actually, as BCBAs, talk about internal events. Really?
Yeah. Yeah. It was huge. I was like, oh, so this is okay. And that was the thing. I had some kind of like imposter syndrome come up of like, oh, like, is this okay for me to be a BCBA and talking about our thought patterns? Like, is that okay for me to kind of be talking about these things? And when I did a mindfulness workshop at the agency I was at, I brought that up and I was like, is this going to be something that is kind of taboo or uncomfortable or like, weird to some people of being like, why are we talking about this? So there's definitely like a lot of those things coming up because you never really know, right? And so many people, when we study and everything, that it isn't very much talked about. So yeah.
Yeah. BCBAs are like notoriously, I don't want to say rigid, but like clinical, and everything has to be like stuff that I could see and test and collect data on. So I could see how that pushback was happening. But do you find, like, in terms of the type of coaching that you do, does it end up being very behavioral? Like, are you, changing habits or changing behaviors, or do you find that it's like really mostly on perspectives and thoughts and feelings? Like, how does that work?
So my title that I've labeled myself as is a mindset and habit change coach. So the mindset is really working through the limiting beliefs and our conditioning from our past. And that is a lot of components of, what was reinforced when we were kids growing up is a lasting effect on us in our day-to-day now. And then habit change is more the behavior change aspect. So like, I have habit trackers. I get my clients to do like a habit baseline and like see what their day-to-day is. So I feel like that is more of like the behavioral aspect where like the habit change, and some clients only really want to work on the mindset. Some clients are all about building better habits. And so I combine the two and I have like different offers for both. But the habit change is really all about like, okay, well, if we're going to get a baseline to understand your habits, and then really understanding, like I always talk about first, then like there's so many certain little components. The book Atomic Habits, actually, as a behavior analyst, I fell in love with that book. So that was really a cool concept because it broke down like a habit loop in a way that's very simplistic for the everyday person to understand and know. Like he uses cue, craving, response, reward. And it's just really cool because that's like a very everyday person thing to understand, but it is very behavior analytic in nature. So I kind of put my own spin on it with my clients. So yeah, there's like
a confession. I bought that book because I was like so interested to read it. Totally not from I didn't know it was behavior analytic. I was just, someone recommended it. And I read like the introduction. And in the introduction, he talks about how he's just going to be referring to like Skinner's, research and all these rules about behavior change. And I was like, I know all this stuff. What? So I wasn't so motivated to finish the book because I was like, am I going to learn anything new here? Or is this behavior analysis for like the layman? I should finish it because he probably does phrase it, like you said, like very user-friendly, which would be really helpful. But yeah, I love that behavior analysis is like becoming more mainstream and all of this stuff is now more available. And I think that with ACT and us as a field pushing ourselves and challenging ourselves to go out of our comfort zone, we're making it more available to, the wider public.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I honestly, like before ACT, and it's interesting because like I went to on Tablet, like I went to conferences and, I kind of heard of ACT but at that time, it wasn't something that I was really like necessarily interested in or knew much about, or just kind of like it was put to the side in my head of like, okay. But that's the thing is like now, especially I want to say after this pandemic, like, like burnout and overwhelm and stress and, just understanding how to work from home and take care of your families. Like there's so many things that everyone has had to go through this past year. It's like that mental health and that self-care and that, compassion towards ourselves, like all of these components really, I think, just exploded in that way of in this past year of just really diving into a lot more of that and how important it really is. So I feel like the pandemic definitely turned some heads for that too.
Yeah, we went to also an ACT workshop right before the pandemic, and it was like, I don't know, a 5-day workshop or something like that. It feels very overwhelming because it's so much new information. But something that we kind of took out from that was, even if we don't use it in our practice or use it with our clients, like we can use it for ourselves. Like it's a lot of tools just to like remind yourself like why we do what we do and develop those habits and the mindset that we want to have, like for ourselves, maybe for our staff, and maybe ultimately for our clients and our parents. But as like more of us and more in the field are interested in this direction that the field is moving in, like, do you have any suggestions for people? Is it just attend an ACT workshop? Like, how can we, or more professionals, incorporate some of this stuff into our practice?
Ooh. So are you referring to like ACT resources, like something that like if anyone was interested in learning more about it?
So it could be ACT, but it could also be, you know, like I attended the workshop and I still feel like it's hard to like then put it into practice, or even if it's not ACT, like something that more professionals could do to acknowledge private events, to acknowledge mindset, to acknowledge things that are maybe like not just the observable and measurable, but things that are still behavioral.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll just say like resource-wise, psychwire.com, that's Dr. Russ Harris. He does brilliant ACT courses. So I would highly recommend for anyone. There's 4-week ones, there's 6-week ones. And what's great about that is he shares all of the materials with you, and he shows videos of like sessions and he talks through them, and he's very animated and he does a lot of metaphors. So like it really does stick with you, and he actually like really gets you to practice them. But he gives you resources and materials throughout. So I would highly recommend that. In the sense of like applying it kind of on a day-to-day, like notice, name, and neutralize, the 3 N's, like that is the one thing that has stuck with me through ACT is like noticing, notice, name, and neutralize. So that's one of the ones that Dr. Russ Harris talked about. And that one has stuck with me because noticing, like if you have either anxiety or a thought come up, noticing it and naming it, which I feel like a lot of people, like when we think of like our even child development, like we teach kids how to identify and label emotions, but we don't really think about it as adults. We just kind of like brush past it or just like try to get through it. Right. But when we allow ourselves to like notice or catch a thought or feeling and then name it, and when you name it, that allows you to separate from it, because these thoughts and feelings are not you. It's not placed on your identity. They're just kind of temporary things that happen in the moment. And then neutralizing. And sometimes you can get into a loop of noticing and naming, like, yeah, okay, I know this is anxiety coming up, like whatever. But if neutralizing is that self-compassion and self-acceptance piece of ACT, where you're neutralizing it to say, hey, I know that you're there and I know that you're coming up. And you can come and go in your own time, because there's a whole component of we want to control it. We want to get rid of it. And I feel like that is a big thing that we all try to do. And so acknowledging that these things will come and go in their own time. And so the neutralizing is allowing yourself to accept that it'll be there and that it's temporary and that it'll come and go on its own time, but you can still, you know, take one tiny action towards what you're doing in the day-to-day. So the notice, name, and neutralize is like one of the big things that I use all the time. And that's like the key thing.
Yeah. I do that after that workshop and just learning. I do it with my kids. They're going to hear me because they're home, but I do that all the time because so much, like, you feel like when a kid expresses their frustration or their anger, you just want to be like, stop being angry. Like, just stop. It's okay. Everything's okay. Don't be worried.
Yeah.
But I've learned to be like, oh, just say like, this is me being nervous, and don't try to convince yourself not to be nervous, but like, just let it come and go. And I find that really helps them also like work. Once you get into a cycle of like, you feel bad about having those feelings, then you beat yourself up feeling bad. And then it's like a cycle of like, but I don't want to be nervous, but I am. And how can I stop being nervous? As opposed to just, like you said, acknowledge it and let it kind of like pass through. So I love that. And I think it's like such a great life tool for our kids to have, like the kids that we're raising, for ourselves, for our staff, especially through a pandemic like one we've just been through, where there's lots of feelings coming to the surface and you don't know what to do with them. So yeah, let's do more of that for everybody.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So you mentioned, doing a lot of supervision kind of in your previous role and mentoring and working with staff. What is your best advice that you would tell someone just coming into the field, just finishing their supervision hours or just passing their exam? Like, what do you think is like the best advice that they would need to know?
Ooh, don't be so hard on yourself. I feel like right when we get like out that gate, we're like, oh my gosh, okay, I have this big label. Like I've got the BCBA title and, just being very open-minded to opportunities really. And yeah, I feel like open communication, like communication is my number one thing, especially being a supervisor and like communicating and supporting staff and giving feedback and all of that is really when you're coming into this field and you become a BCBA, really being open to communicating your needs or your interests or where you can improve, like allowing yourself to be okay with having that component, because that is really what's going to make a lasting effect on your experience. Because if you aren't open to, yes, when you're new, like not going into it being like, okay, I know everything now. And it's like, that's kind of the hard part sometimes. And so allowing yourself to have that open communication of being like, I'm new, but like, I'm ready to learn and understand, and just having that open communication of like your own interests of like what you want out of the supervision or where you're working and whatnot. And then just being open to that feedback and as we've been talking about ACT is also like being open about like when you are feeling burnt out or overwhelmed or, having that vulnerability, I think is also a very taboo topic and thing. But at the same time, our field does experience a lot of burnout and overwhelm. And I feel like we don't really express it as often. And that sometimes is a lot harder. So, it takes a lot of guts to kind of have all of that open communication and be vulnerable or just share your side, but that will really expand your experience in so many ways.
I completely agree. I really think there should be a course either required for our master's degree or required for, to sit the exam in terms of just communication and not only accepting feedback, but learning how to give feedback as well. It definitely needs to be something that every single person could benefit from.
Yeah. Because giving feedback is definitely a whole other world. It's like, okay, well now like I'm in that position to give feedback, and what is an appropriate way to give feedback? And there's so many different levels of that too. So definitely.
And the way you give feedback to one person isn't the way you give feedback to another person, based on their personality and based on what they're going through in life, et cetera, et cetera.
Everything is individualized in our field, always individualized.
So much so.
And like you said, it's so important when you're first coming, into the field to be vulnerable and admit when you need help and, be able to ask for help and communicate. But at the same time, you also mentioned, that imposter syndrome and kind of knowing yourself and knowing the difference between, no, I can do this, and this is just me talking myself out of it, versus no, maybe I should ask for help. And I think that that's a really hard thing to kind of get used to, especially when you're just learning and just coming into the field. But it's so important to know the difference, right? To know yourself enough to know, when am I just afraid and this is, my imposter syndrome, or when do I really need to ask for help and I really shouldn't be trying something that I'm not capable of.
Yeah. And that's the thing too. Like I've had supervisees that like come to me to ask like the 1,000 questions. And then, at that point, I'm like, that's where I kind of give the encouragement to be like, you're asking me these, but I know you know them. Like there's definitely like those conversations too. But yeah, there's always that fine line of like, just kind of go into it. You've got this, but also like asking for that support. So definitely a fine line there too, for sure.
So if there was something, our field is always evolving and we're constantly coming out with new task lists, as much to our, disappointment that we have to keep updating. But if there was one thing that you could choose to change about the field, is there anything that you think we like really need to do better at?
I feel like we've talked a lot about it already in this interview, but essentially just that open communication and I guess the supervision component, but also, we are extending into ACT and having a lot more open communication and conversations about internal and private events and what that looks like and how we can really incorporate that. And I feel like that is a new thing, yet it is evolving. So I am really excited about that. I feel like that is it's definitely getting traction a lot more now. So I would say that is definitely a big area of ABA that hasn't really been tackled. So I would say really expanding into that and bringing that into more aspects, not just with individuals with autism, but like in the ABA field itself, in special education classrooms, teaching teachers of just like understanding what it means to process emotions. Like, I just feel like there's a whole world of that can really be tackled. And as I said, open communication of just like what that really looks like. I would say those are kind of those two factors for me.
You've already mentioned a few of your go-to ABA resources, but would you have any more that you would recommend people read?
I mean, you guys have an amazing behavior resource just for BCBAs in general. Your behavior resource, How to ABA, I absolutely love it. You guys share amazing tools and resources in there.
Thank you.
I don't have any others off the top of my head that I can think of for specifics, but ACT Made Simple is kind of like the textbook for ACT. So that is a really great resource in a textbook format that is easily accessible.
Awesome. I can see it in your face that you're still thinking, and I know that as soon as you stop on this web
I know.
on this podcast, you're going to go, oh my gosh, and this, and this, and this, and this.
Well, like, wait, there's so many more, but those are the things I can think of.
Amazing.
I personally love the application of ABA outside of anything that's typical IBI or one-to-one clinical. And so I think it's super interesting that you were able to really find this niche, but yet still practice ABA, right? Like you're kind of doing the best of both worlds, which you must be super busy. So I don't know how you have time for anything else, but hopefully it will just continue to grow. I don't know if you're going to have to choose one or the other, but maybe not. So I think it's super interesting. And I think it's so important for more people in the field to be hearing about all these options that are out there that are available on the applications of ABA. So we're going to share your website in the show notes, but do you want to tell people how they can find out more about you?
Yeah. So my website has both sections of life coaching and the behavior consulting. So it's SonyaMacCrimmon.com is my website. If people are interested in the life coaching, I can share my Instagram for that, which is SonyaJMac.coaching. That's my whole coaching page. And those are like the two main places to find me. And I have a bunch of resources on my coaching page. So that's kind of my go-to spot right now, but there's more.
And the coaching is virtual, right? So you don't even have to be local.
Yeah. So I've had some people in the States. I've had some people in BC. So yeah, that's been a really cool part. I think that's why everything just kind of seemed so accessible because of the pandemic. Like everyone just became so accustomed to Zoom. And as ironic as it is, I got Zoom for my life coaching program, in February. And I remember being like, what's Zoom? When I did it. Yeah. And now I'm just like, this is the norm now. Who doesn't know Zoom?
Right? A month later, everyone knows Zoom.
Yeah. We have been using
stocks. We started life coaching.
Yeah. No, it is nice that it's more typical now for people to be doing things virtually. And it's, like you said, makes it more accessible, which is amazing. So,
and I definitely think that was a big component for the ABA community as well. It's everything about telehealth services. What does that mean? What, all of these ethics and all those components with telehealth. But now the pandemic has kind of pushed that whole envelope of a whole new realm of possibilities. And I'm able to do remote supervision. And if I can't go into a home, I could do a Zoom observation. There's so many new aspects and avenues that has actually opened up in this time too. So.
Yeah. We hope it continues so that we continue to just do better like we need to do. Okay, well, thank you so much, Sonya. It was so nice to meet you and hear more about you. And good luck with growing both of your businesses. And we hope to be able to support you even more. Yeah, thank you so much. And it's funny because I came on this to be BCBA
BCBA, but I was like, I didn't even really like approach it in the sense of my life coaching. So it's kind of cool that I can really integrate all of them. And that's really what I've been able to really enjoy about the field and connecting both. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for sharing.
Thanks for joining today's conversation. Wherever you get your podcast, please go and subscribe, rate and review so others can find out about us too.
For more from How to ABA, including free resources and ABA materials, visit our blog at howtoaba.com and make sure that you're following us on social media for more practical tips and updates.